Welcome to your e-learning day video talking about using the discriminant to determine how many and what type of roots we have. The discriminant is the part of the quadratic formula that is underneath the radical sign. So b squared minus 4ac is the part that we're talking about here. When we refer to the discriminant, it's just this little piece here before we actually take the square root of it. So we're going to be looking at the value of the discriminant and using that to determine how many and what type of roots we've got. If we evaluate the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, and we get a positive number, any kind of positive number, then we are going to have two real roots. So when I look at my graph, I have two x-intercepts. If it turns out that when I do b squared minus 4ac, I get a perfect square, I get something like 4 or 9 or 16 or 25 or 36, on and on and on. That means we're going to have rational roots, roots that we could write as fractions or whole numbers. If I get a positive number, but it is not a perfect square, so something like 5 or 7 or 22 or, let's see, any number of things, 112, we will still get two x-intercepts, but they're going to be irrational roots. So we're still going to have a radical in our final answer when it's fully simplified. When we evaluate the discriminant, every now and then it comes out to be exactly 0. Everything cancels out, and I'm just left with 0 when I evaluate that discriminant. That means I'm going to end up with one real root, and it will be rational. So when I go to look at my graph, there is only one x-intercept. That means that my vertex is the only part of this parabola that is going to touch the x-axis. It will always be the vertex touching the x-axis if I get 0 when I evaluate that discriminant. It won't always open down like the last two examples that you've seen, but it will always be the vertex. The last possible thing that could happen is I end up getting a negative number for my discriminant. Remember, the discriminant is the part of the quadratic formula that is underneath the radical. So if I end up with a negative number underneath that radical, that means we're going to have complex or imaginary roots. So two complex roots. And when I look at this graph, you'll notice there are no x-intercepts. So if we get a negative for our discriminant, we would have a negative under the radical when we substitute it into quadratic formula. And because of that negative number, we would only have imaginary roots, complex roots. No real solutions, no x-intercepts. All right, let's practice this with a couple of problems. We want to evaluate the discriminant for 2x squared minus 10x plus 7. First thing I always need to make sure is that it's set equal to 0. Since this one is set equal to 0, I am ready to move on. We need to identify our values for a, b, and c next. Well, I know general form for a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c. So that means that the a value for this quadratic is going to be 2. The b value for this quadratic, be careful, I have to grab that sign with it. It's going to be negative 10. And c, right here on the end, is going to be 7. So we're going to take those values and substitute them in. So I have negative 10 squared, because remember it's b squared, minus 4 times a is 2, times c, and c is 7. So when I take this negative 10 and I square it, remember squaring means to multiply it by itself. Negative 10 times negative 10 gives me positive 100. And then I come back here and I need to multiply these numbers together on my calculator. 4 times 2 times 7. When I pop all that in my calculator, I get 56. We've dropped our subtraction sign down, so I have 100 minus 56. Go ahead and pop that into your calculator. You should get 44. The discriminant is non-zero, so there are going to be two roots, specifically two real roots. We have two x-intercepts here. Two real roots. The roots are going to be irrational. So two real irrational roots. They're irrational because when I do the square root of 44, that's not going to come out to be a whole number. That's not a perfect square like 49 or 36 is. I don't know two numbers that when I multiply them together, I don't know a number that when I multiply it by itself, I get 44. All right, let's try a check of this skill. Take a moment. I want you to evaluate the discriminant for 2x squared plus 8x plus 8. Go ahead and pause the video and evaluate that discriminant. All right, hopefully you are all done evaluating this discriminant. You should have gotten 0. Let's talk about how you get 0. So I know my A value is this 2 right here. My B value is 8. My C value is also 8. So I'm going to substitute into the formula for the discriminant. So I have B squared. So 8 squared minus 4 times A is 2, times C, and C was 8. When I take my value for B and square it, I do 8 squared, that gives me 64. I'm going to drop down my subtraction sign right here, and then I have to multiply 4 times 2 times 8. Well, 4 times 2 gives me 8. 8 times 8 gives me 64. So if I pop 4 times 2 times 8 into my calculator, it gives me 64. And 64 minus 64 is 0. Since it came out to be exactly 0, there is one real root, and it is going to be rational. One real rational root. All right, let's go look at an example again. Example number 5, page 186. We're going to find the value for the discriminant of negative 5x squared plus 10x minus 15 equals 0. Always make sure that it's set equal to 0 before you get started. All right, so our value for A is negative 5. Our value for B is positive 10, and our value for C is negative 15. So negative 5, positive 10, and negative 15. We're going to substitute into the formula for our discriminant. So I want B squared, 10 squared, minus 4 times A was negative 5, times C, which was negative 15. All right, so when I take B and square it, my apologies. 10 squared gives me 100. We're going to drop this subtraction sign right down. And then I need to evaluate these pieces right here. So I do 4 times negative 5, that gives me negative 20. Negative 20 times negative 15, pop all that in my calculator if I need to, I get 300. So I do 100 minus 300. That gives me a value of negative 200. Notice we have a negative number here. That means there would be a negative number underneath the radical. That means we are going to have complex. or complex or imaginary roots? We're going to get 2 complex roots. All right. One more check and then we'll talk about your homework. Go ahead and pause the video. Find the discriminant for 10x squared minus 4x plus 7. Go ahead and hit pause now. Find the value of that discriminant and then come back and check your answer. All right, welcome back. You should have gotten the value for that discriminant to be negative 264. Your value for A was 10. Your value for B was negative 4. Don't forget that negative. And then your value for C was 7. So when you substitute in, you have negative 4 squared minus 4 times A was 10, times C was 7. When I square this negative 4, I get 16. Drop my negative sign straight down here. And then I need to multiply together 4 times 10 times 7. Well, 4 times 10 is 40. 40 times 7 is 280. So I have 16 minus 280, which gives me negative 264. We have a negative number. That means I would have a negative underneath my radical. So there are 2 complex roots or 2 imaginary roots. All right, nice work. Your homework for 3-6 is due tomorrow, pages 187 to 189. You need to complete problems 4, 5, 7, 12, 19, 24, 30, 34, 36 through 38, and 47. If you have any difficulties with that or you have any questions, don't forget to reach out to your teacher through Canvas, and we will see you guys back at school tomorrow.